the charges in New York, even after that case was dropped, the criminal case at the Sofitel, there were still people saying that this did not mean the end of his political future in France. He could probably be a kingmaker. He couldn't be a presidential candidate. That date had passed, but there was nothing that said he couldn't be an elder statesman in the Socialist Party and perhaps even come back in a future government. Even after the IMF charges, even after the charges in New York. I think what really put the nail in the coffin, if you like, of his political career was not so much Tristan Banon, although that didn't help, but it's these charges in Lille. I mean, this is the one where people are starting to say, even if the charges are shown to be outrageous and exaggerated, which is entirely possible given the legal system, this is the kind of thing where people say, nope, he really can't come back from this. And even through all of this, you will find people who said he did a terrific job at the IMF. He's a brilliant economist. He's a good leader of people. You will find people who were sorry to see him go, and people at the IMF who were distraught at the idea that he had to leave, even given the circumstances. So, not a black and white character by any means, a strong personality with very strong positives and negatives to his credit.
When there are sex scandals in a lot of countries, the stereotype image is the man comes out and his wife is standing by his side, the wife who 3 or 6 or months later down the road throws him in, packs him in. In this case, his wife isn't just anybody. She's a former star presenter on French television.
Well, actually, Anne Sinclair, during long weeks, she has been really supporting him. And, there was a debate about GSK, and many people said that GSK reputation, GSK image was very much help thanks to Anne Sinclair, because she was being strong and, she has a lot of dignity, and she stayed beside him and she helped him financially last summer because she paid a lot for him. So she was really part of her image, part of his image. And right now it's very interesting to see that publicly, she's not here anymore. She has come back in journalism because she used to be, as you said, a big star in journalism, and now she's running the Huffington Post in France. And she was very clear, because she was, of course, attacked on this affair and saying, what will you do, if an affair comes, and she said, there's my privacy and there's my professional life. So from now on, there was, a big debate on their couple, because their life was kind of public, and GSK, he really played on.
And French women are very divided, it seems, over this.
It's difficult yet to say, because many people didn't understand how she could stay beside him, and many women, especially women and all the feminists, they say, she should have, just abandoned him and let him doing his business. And some others say she has dignity and she has courage, and some others say, it's also communication, it's also politics, because, as you said, many people were thinking he could have come back in the presidential election. And even last summer, when on the socialist side, the candidate was elected, he was chosen, so François Hollande, and some said maybe we could, organize another election so that he could run in that election. And after, when Tristan Banon arrived and when people, as you said, really understood. So Anne Sinclair, she was being with him also because in France, all the presidents, all the candidates, they always have a wife beside them. So just for the image, it was, I think, very important for them to be a couple.
Ron Sofer, this case plays to stereotypes of who the French are in some cases. When you're speaking with clients who are not French and everything, what are they telling you? What are they asking you?
Well, this case is a very interesting case. I think that Anne Sinclair is probably the reason why this case might be settled, because Ms. Diallo's lawyers know that if they get a judgment against Dominique Strauss-Kahn, they would have to come and enforce it in France. There is a serious legal issue as to whether the French courts will recognize punitive damages. The French Supreme Court in recent years, after decades of rejecting punitive damages, has said that it might recognize if it's not too disproportional. So they would have a long legal battle in France trying to enforce a U.S. judgment. The only way she can get paid is if Anne Sinclair
whose family's wealthy.
accepts to pay some kind of a settlement in order to prevent Dominique Strauss-Kahn from having to face the possibility of being deposed and asked all kinds of questions about his private life. It is a very, very interesting case, and we'll see what happens.
All right, and Eric Lassagne, we've spent a lot of time these last 10 months explaining the U.S. legal system to French people. Now it seems to be the tables are turned, especially Ron Sofer was mentioning the fact that the concept of being placed under formal investigation, which is not the same thing as being indicted. Comments on Facebook and Twitter, sometimes touching on the semantics of the French translation for the charge against Strauss-Kahn. Our good friend Dave Clark from the French news agency AFP writes, just thinking Jay-Z ought to do a track on aggravated pimping, which is how some people have translated what the charge is that Dominique Strauss-Kahn could potentially face. Are you finding yourself having to look up translations a lot the last week?
Well, for the work I've done at France 24 and actually listening to your own correspondents who have oftentimes characterized it that same way as aggravated pimping. Pimping, though, is a crime in the United States. The underlying crime or the underlying act of prostitution in the United States is also generally illegal with some small exceptions. So that's a big difference between the U.S. and France, is that the underlying act of prostitution itself is not a criminal offense in France. But the act of organizing some type of activity that promotes prostitution or benefiting from it or laundering money, for example, from it, or not paying taxes that are earned from this activity, this all gives rise to criminal offenses in the United States. And that is usually the subject of major investigations. Not the actual prostitution itself is rarely the subject of a complex federal investigation in the United States.
All right, and as we were saying, there are scandals of all sorts all the time. Over in the UK this past weekend, the Sunday Times published the findings of an undercover investigation where handlers for the British Prime Minister promised FaceTime with David Cameron in exchange for cash. On Monday, Cameron bowing to pressure and promising to publish the names of those who've already attended private meals for Conservative Party donors. The story has made a huge splash in the British papers. Meanwhile, in France, there's been the latest revelations that were out Tuesday evening in Le Monde, the big broadsheet of record, which allege illicit financing directly towards Nicolas Sarkozy's 2007 run for president, by that coming from L'Oréal heiress Liliane Bettencourt. Anne Bagger-Murray, that story, to use a journalist parlance, has no legs on it, it seems. It was on the front page of Le Monde last night. It wasn't even talked about this morning.
Is that because there is no substance to the rumor? Is that because this kind of thing is so commonplace it doesn't raise anybody's eyebrows anymore? It's a big question as to why something like that, which, influence peddling, you can argue, is the crime that allows all other crimes in a political system. If you start limiting who can buy access to the politicians, whether that's legal access through lobbyists or illegal access through influence peddling, you outlaw that and you start having clean politics. So we haven't had that for a long time in pretty much any civilized democracy, or even in a few uncivilized ones. So it's hard to see how this kind of a story, which at its roots should raise everybody's hackles, just doesn't do it. Is it because there's no sex involved? And we've been talking about sex scandals all for the last 40 minutes. Is that the reason nobody's talking about it?
And what's interesting is that when you read the comments on the internet, and you can see that people, most of them have the same reaction. First, do you have some proof? And secondly, and that's quite amazing, as you were saying, everyone is doing it. Who cares? And, just like
you're talking about illicit financing here.
Yeah. So people, they just, there's no emotion, there's no, scandal. You don't have anything to see. And that's why, you don't have a show. So, people, they're just not very interested in it. And even on our website, we published an article about this story, but, it wasn't so much read.
Instead, they're reading about Strauss-Kahn.
Oh, Strauss-Kahn is just amazing.
when it comes to Strauss-Kahn, the man who, again, has his place as a Socialist Party standard bearer now, François Hollande, told French radio on Tuesday, "It's a private matter, it's painful, but not something that I have to make a political judgment about." And we heard the same line from the party boss, who also happens to be, by the way, the mayor of Lille, where those charges were filed.
Listen, I think this is over. We should let justice run its course. I don't have any comments on this today.
And his former friends inside the Socialist Party turning the page. Will it hurt in any way the Socialists' campaign in the final run to president? François Hollande in the lead in the polls right now.
I don't think so. I think that the political implications and of the Dominique Strauss-Kahn affair has run its course last summer. I don't think that it will have any impact.
We got several comments from Facebook and Twitter. One from Magnus Opus, who writes, "The absolute truth is that it's better that all this came out before he had almost certainly become president of the Republic." And Bagger Murray, it's incredible to think that, again, Strauss-Kahn was the front runner, and now he's a has-been.
I happen to agree with Mr. Sofer. There's no scenario under which I can imagine a French voter going to the polls and saying, "Well, I'm going to vote for Hollande because, after all, that's Strauss-Kahn's party, and that still has influence over me," or "I'm going to vote against the socialists because that's Strauss-Kahn's party." He's not a player anymore. I think the French are going to make their decision based on the attributes they ascribe to the candidates. And yeah, I think the French electorate probably did dodge a bullet in a strange way, because if these allegations had come out after he had become president of the Republic, or these accusations had come out,
or in the heat of the campaign,
it would have been a completely different story. There, you would probably have seen socialist electors very angry that they were being robbed of a viable candidate. In this case, they may still feel as though they were robbed of a viable candidate, but arguably they have another viable candidate who's on his way. So, yeah, I think it's tragic in a way that a very smart man is not going to be able to achieve what he probably and his wife thought were his destiny. But on the other hand, this is the way it plays out. This is who he is. And we do find eventually that our politicians are just human after all.
All right, so the Socialist Party, it seems relatively unscathed from all of this. We've been discussing Strauss-Kahn and gender politics for 10 months now. It's too early, it seems, to tell if there's going to be lasting impacts on the wider body politic and on French society and the relations between men and women in the workplace and the high halls of power. Just a reminder, they're going to dissolve Parliament in June and vote in a new one after the president's elected. The outgoing National Assembly, 18% of MPs are female, one of the lowest percentages in all of Europe. Aude Baron, have things changed in the workplace? Have things changed in the high halls of power?
Sincerely, no. No, I think there was a debate last summer, and we had to question our system, our political system, and the relationship between the media and the politics. And there was a debate about harassment. There was
a junior secretary inside the government, a junior minister who was forced to resign in the wake of all of this.
Yeah, but in fact, there was a whole reflection, but after, when you look at the facts, what really changed? Or maybe it's a bit too soon also, because, these things, it's a mentality, and you need time, you need maybe months or maybe years. But today, you don't see so many changes, and when you see for the presidential election on the right wing for Sarkozy, you don't see so many women, on the stage. And the Socialist Party, they try, to push some women. You have one or two coming, but when you look, on the TV shows or when you listen to the radio, you mostly hear men. So I'm not sure it really changed things.
Eric Lassagne, let me ask, not the lawyer, but the American. When you come to Paris and you see the way things are over here, in the wake of this scandal and the debate that it's risen up as a result, what do you think when you come to France and that relationship between men and women in the workplace?
I think it gives rise to a debate which is by and large a healthy debate that the society should have, and it allows the society collectively analyzes its values, There are some things that are different than the United States. I think overall, the French society remains in some ways a more tolerant one with respect to these matters than the U.S. society. I think that was the perception before these events became public, and I think that remains the perception. I would also say that in the United States, I mean, we actually had a president, John Kennedy, who exhibited similar traits, and I don't know to what extent his legacy has been substantially altered by that. I think the ones who thought he was a good president in terms of his public dealings remain of that opinion, and the ones who thought otherwise remain of that opinion. But there's a lot of issues here. There's a lot of underlying, almost philosophical issues that should be debated, and the limits of coverage of the candidate's privacy, which is the opposite side of the coin, should be considered too. Maybe so. There's been a rebalancing in France. Maybe saying some of these things that we knew about Strauss-Kahn perhaps should have been made public, but how far should we go? That's a healthy debate to have.
Ron Sofer?
I think that the implications of this affair are important because it will impact the issue of privacy. The right to privacy is very important in Europe. As a matter of fact, it's specifically protected under the European Convention of Human Rights, which is something that, for example, the US Constitution does not have a specific clause protecting privacy. Up until now, the private lives of even politicians have been kept secret. No journalist has written about them. Is this going to change or not? That's really the question that one has to ask himself.
And Bagger-Murray?
Yeah, I do think it's a matter of degree. As you said, this is a healthy debate to have. I think there was a lot of talk last summer about how this was a watershed moment for women in France, for feminism, for stiffening or at least enforcing the current existing laws on sexual harassment. I don't think in the end a great deal has changed. I think one reason for that is that things do change slowly in a society. I think the other reason for that is by now Strauss-Kahn is not seen as emblematic of the culture in the workplace or in politics. He's seen as an aberration. Here's one person who was just out of control. He's not a typical politician. He's not a typical IMF head. So, and I think it also comes down to the fact that when you have men and women working side by side, there is going to be some tension. There is going to be a negotiation of the line that really mustn't be crossed. Americans have negotiated it in one place. The French have negotiated it in another. It seems a shame to, and this happens quite frequently between France and the United States. A recent book about how to raise children caused this to come up. Who does it better? Is it the American way that we should follow? Is it the French way? As though they were completely separate and as though they could be placed opposite each other. That's not the case with workplace relations. It's not the case with political relations. It's not the case with raising children. So the more we talk about this, I think the more people decide for themselves where the line lies. And I think actually one area in which this probably has helped women is that I think women in general that I've seen are more comfortable standing up and saying no.
And saying no. Well, we're going to leave it there. And Bagger-Murray, I want to thank you, Ron Sofer, Aude Baron, and Eric Lisan. I want to thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's business. Marcus Carlson will have all the latest.
Every week, France 24 brings you all the latest news from the world of sailing and water sports. Follow the action from the major international sailing events. Catch up with the latest technological advances from the boat shows. Join us. Become part of the crew. Connect with the world of sea lovers and water sports enthusiasts. Follow the Call of the Sea with Whirlwinds, Saturday, 12:40 p.m. Paris time on France 24.
out.